Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time once again for another episode of OC Spotlight. The one show, maybe the only show that shows you the most incredible people doing the most amazing things. Things you may not even know exist right here in Southern California, right in your own backyard. And boy, have we got one that fits that description here today. We are going to talk with a young man that works with and helps out for a very, very unique place called the Lincoln Memorial and Shrine, located out in Redlands, California. Yes, there's a beautiful Lincoln Memorial and Shrine in Redlands. And joining us to talk about it is Dan Coates. Welcome, sir. How are you? Do I call you Daniel or Dan today here?
You can call me Daniel.
Okay, all right. Daniel, I want to understand, what the heck is a Lincoln Memorial and Shrine doing in Southern California, much less out in sleepy Redlands? What is it? How did it get there?
So thank you so much for having me. So the Lincoln Shrine is the only museum dedicated specifically to Abraham Lincoln in the Western U.S. I've even seen where they say it's the only one of its kind west of the Mississippi River. So this is a whole, like, more than half of the country where there isn't anything like this. And it's in the city of Redlands because it was donated to the city by Robert Watchhorn, who was an immigration commissioner at Ellis Island for some time, and also a wealthy oil man. And he and his wife, Elma, admired Lincoln, and they wanted there to be a place in the Western U.S. to honor America's 16th president. And the shrine was built in 1932. It's been a treasured part of the city of Redlands ever since. And they expanded the shrine in 1998. And
So
Robert Watchhorn died in 1944.
So
and
Redlands.
Since then, it's been maintained by the A.K. Smiley Public Library, as well as with like a private endowment too. So it's like a mixture of public and private funding.
Okay. Well, I'm anxious to jump in here and learn more about it because I was a Civil War buff as a kid. I was going to bring it on the show here, but my great grandfather was a Mason and worked with marble. And in our home, there was always a bust of Lincoln because he admired Lincoln. So many did in those days, after the turn of the century. I don't know why. We were all taught in school, which I don't think they learn anymore, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We were kidding. You were reciting some of it beforehand here. All I know is 7 years ago, and then it all sort of goes into a mumble here, which was, as I understand, written on the back of an envelope, sort of on the train on his way to this dedication of the giant cemetery at Gettysburg. You know, one of the largest battles of the Civil War, perhaps the turning point in the Civil War up in Pennsylvania. I've been there myself. And here he writes this thing, scribbles it on the back of an envelope. He's one of 2 or 3 speakers, I guess, that day. One guy talked for a couple hours. I don't even know the guy's name. What he said has been long since forgotten, as Lincoln alluded to in his Gettysburg Address. But here, what is it about this man that moves so many people? This gentleman, this wealthy oilman in Redlands, my great-grandfather, so many teachers that had to teach us this, and apparently you too. What moves so many people about Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I just wanted to mention how you were saying about with the Gettysburg Address of how like another man gave a very long speech and Lincoln's was just like a short speech, but it was very succinct and to the point.
Right.
And that's a great thing for all of us to learn too, of like sometimes it's not really the quantity of words, it's like the quality of them. And Lincoln was good with that. And what's really interesting about Lincoln today is our country's so divided today.
Oh.
And yet, according to a Yahoo News YouGov poll back in 2020, Lincoln is America's most admired president. 75% of Americans think he was great or at least better than average. But here's what's really interesting. Republicans and Democrats are just as likely to consider Lincoln great. 54% of Republicans think he's great and 54% of Democrats. And I just find that really fascinating because I don't think there's anyone else who has bipartisan support like that today.
And he was, if people don't realize, the first Republican president for a brand new party.
He was
a party that was
that,
largely formed on emancipation of abolition, right?
Yes, definitely. And that's in and of itself is remarkable too, considering that this is someone who basically started a whole political party, and he didn't really have a background of someone you would think would be a president. He's a very real person, and in his young adulthood, he had a lot of struggles. He struggled with body image issues. He
Oh,
was six
yeah.
foot four, and
At a
he
time
he
when
felt
nobody was 6'4", everybody's 5'4".
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and he felt he was very unattractive. Also, in his 20s, he was in two business partnerships. They both failed. He went through periods of unemployment. He had debt issues. He had romantic relationships that fell through.
He's from the West, what was considered the West, out in the wilderness here, and he was kind of a bumpkin, and he's born in a log cabin and tried to play all this up. And yes, he grew a beard. I have a beard too. It's my
Yeah,
Lincoln memorial here, myself here, because some little girl supposedly wrote to him and said, "You'd look a lot better if you had a beard."
yeah.
Cover.
I've looked at the photos of Lincoln, and I'm not so sure I agree with that. I think he looked pretty good, clean
Oh, he
shaven,
had
but that's
big
just me.
ears, and he had a strange, very angular face and everything. He wasn't a Hollywood matinee idol, even for those days here.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
he talked. He had this, funny kind of drawl from the West. He was an unsophisticated person, at least so they thought at the time, and and in a brand new political party, the least likely person to become president of the United States, and at the worst possible time, because other than today's extremely divided time, many, almost half jokingly say we're in a civil war of ourselves. It's more a war of civility to one another here. But certainly there are those who, evoke that image of that time. It feels more like 1850 than any other period we've had, where the country was so divided. Talk about that a little bit. I studied it for years. I was fascinated about it.
It was a very divided time in our country, and at the time, the issue of slavery was there was a transition going on about it, because the slave trade had actually ended in 1808, and a lot of people don't really
I
realize
didn't
that.
know that. No, the
Yeah,
importation of new slaves into the country.
yeah, the importation of new slaves had ended in 1808, but the question was about existing slaves.
Right.
And for a long time, for several generations, the U.S. had worked out these compromises, and eventually, but the issue became more and more polarizing, and it became clear that there wasn't going to be able to be more and more compromise. It was going to end up either all slave or all free, and that's what Lincoln said in his famous quote. He was quoting Jesus's words in the New Testament, and he said how a house divided can't stand.
Yeah, right.
And
And that was
and
true. I mean, the minute he
yeah,
got elected, the South didn't even give him a chance. They said, "We're seceding. If this is the guy that's going to be," and it was a five-way split, because at that time you had the Whig Party and the long forgotten Whig Party, the party of businesses and all that sort of stuff. And then you had the Democratic Party that had been around for a while, which was more the People's Party. It was from Andrew Jackson and whatnot. And you had these two parties that split with two different candidates, a North and a South Democrat, a North and a South Whig. So there are five people running in an election, which is why it split the vote up and allowed an unknown like Lincoln to come in. And the minute he did, they started pulling out. We're done. The Southern states said, we're not even going to entertain this anymore. We're not even going to listen to, because he wasn't immediately advocating for the abolition of slavery or whatnot, but he was clearly an abolitionist party, and they didn't even want to give it a chance. And the fear was, as the country expanded, they would be swamped, as all these new states were being built in the states, as countries moving west of the Mississippi. The question was, did they become slave or free? California was one of those. And
definitely.
more and more, they tried to come up with a compromise, 1 for 1, or the Missouri Compromise and all these crazy things. If you're north of a line, maybe you can be slave, or maybe the people can vote. In Kansas, they were allowed to vote for themselves, start the bloody Kansas Wars. Are we going to be a slave state? But it was all about that. What is slavery, or the slave states, which had such strength and such power in the early years of our country, because there weren't that many states, and they were a big chunk of it, and Virginia being the key. The home of all the early presidents, Jefferson and Monroe and Madison and Washington and all this stuff. All of that came to a head when Lincoln came forth. Why? And he presided over the bloodiest civil war I think any Western civilization's ever seen. I mean, we certainly slaughtered each other in record numbers here. And it was only when we quit slugging that, as that series on PBS talks about, that used to the Civil War, the guy said before, I forget his name, Shelby Foote or whatever, the historian, he said, before the Civil War, we talked of us as the United States are a country. After the war, it was the United States of America is a country. The United States became singular and not no longer plural in that sense. I always thought that said it all. Well, that's my
that's a really good observation, actually, and that's what happened with the constitutional amendments after Lincoln's time. How the Constitution really became codified for the nation as a whole. Like originally, the Constitution was for the federal government, and
right.
then it became where it's like the state and local governments obey it as well, and it really became one nation in a way that it had not been previously.
Well, I'm not here to do a whole essay on American history. I could go on forever. I've been fascinated my whole life. I was a history major in college and all that, and studied the Civil War in depth, which is why it caught my eye. Why would there be a shrine to this guy in the Western United States? He didn't ever come to Redlands, did he? Did he ever come to California? I don't think so, did he?
Actually, to my knowledge, I do believe that.
We have to look that up. I'm not sure if he ever, because
Yes,
you wouldn't
actually,
travel in those days. There was no intercontinental railroad even back then. This is the 1850s.
Okay, yeah, Lincoln never visited California. Actually, that is correct. He never did visit California.
So why would a memorial? I know this man was fascinated with him. He'd been an immigration official at Ellis Island, where all the immigrants came through, including my relatives a million years ago, the Irish relatives that I had and the Polish relatives. They all came through that central point, so many of us. But Lincoln wasn't really involved in immigration that much. That wasn't his issue. That wasn't what he's remembered for. Something about this moved this man. Do we know why he was so moved by Lincoln?
Well, part of the story actually is Watchhorn was from Great Britain originally by birth, and he came to the U.S. as a young man. And he was fascinated by the story of Lincoln, and
as was my grandfather, our great grandfather, as was everybody, as I was a kid. I mean, as you say, today people still are. There's something about this man that's so moving, so honest, so human, so bringing us together at a time when we were literally killing each other to pull apart.
And keep in mind, too, at the time of Watchhorn, when he was in his prime in the early 1900s, Lincoln was only about 40 to 50 years removed from that time.
That's true, too. Right.
So Lincoln was as recent at that time as, like, let's say, Nixon or the Kennedys are in our time.
Yeah, right.
And Watchhorn began collecting books, artifacts, manuscripts associated with Lincoln. And this kind of paved the way for him. He, being a resident of Redlands, which he chose the town first as his winter home, and that opened the door for it to end up in the city of Redlands.
I don't think most people realize what a treasure Redlands is. I've been there only a few times on my way somewhere to Palm Springs or whatever, and there are beautiful Victorian mansions. That was a very popular place for wealthy people out east to come out west in the winter when it's miserable back there, and they would build these magnificent homes. I'm assuming he's one of them.
Yeah, definitely. At that time, in late Victorian, Edwardian era, Redlands was the place to be.
Right.
And it attracted a lot of people. It attracted this man. It attracted many others. It still attracts people today, except today it's being turned into like the typical Southern California tract homes and warehouses.
Yeah, exactly. Although they have a lot of those Victorian homes still in existence, don't they? And try and preserve them and hold on to them. Yeah.
They still do, and it's a great place if you're a homeowner and you want to be a homeowner and you want to have like an older home to restore. It's a great community, and then to visit too. Something to definitely not miss. It's right near the Lincoln Shrine. It's actually just right across the street from it. There's the Redlands Bowl, and the Redlands Bowl hosts the oldest continuous free outdoor music festival each year. It runs on Tuesday and Friday nights from June through August. They are planning to do it again this year. They didn't do it last year.
Yeah,
and so actually, I'm not sure if that claim to fame actually still stands, that it's the longest continuously running. Because
we'll let it sit. I'm Irish. We'll exaggerate a bit here. So the museum obviously has shut down during these difficult times, like so many have, but it has reopened, I'm told, in April 1st.
Yes, April 1st it reopened. Right now it's open Thursday through Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. each day. And I'm hoping they'll restore more hours, but it is open for visitors, and there are also virtual exhibitions on the website lincolnshrine.org.
And what does it cost, and what do you see if you go there?
It is free.
Free.
So definitely, it's a great like low cost stay. the only thing that costs would just be the gas and just the cost of maybe like a meal or whatever in nearby downtown Redlands. You have to check out the downtown. It's really
some
great.
great places to eat in Redlands. Yeah, again, some really cool restaurants and stuff. It's a place that you don't expect to see in Southern California. It looks more like something you'd see out east because they brought the east to the west here. And
one restaurant, if you have a place to, if you're looking for a place to eat there, one restaurant is a place called Dat Island, DHAT Island. It's Caribbean cuisine, and the owner of that restaurant actually is a survivor of the 2010 Haiti earthquake. He was actually in Port-au-Prince the day that happened.
See, who would know? You've just given us a whole slew of interesting things on our way to Redlands. All right. So
in the shrine itself,
what
some things that you have to see would be there's a bust of the famous clean-shaven early Lincoln. Mm-hmm. There are also exhibits about the naval battles in the Civil War. We tend to think of the Civil War as being a land-based war, and mostly it was. But it was also the beginning of some attempts at submarine warfare.
Yes. And well, I'll stop you there. Now you got me going again here. I'll comment on that. So obviously Lincoln's strategy was to strangle the South. And so he shut off all their ports because the South didn't have enough factories and material. They were, shall we say, more of the generals, more of the military institutes, all that kind of tradition came, the martial tradition of famous people from the Revolution and stuff, including Robert E. Lee's father, Light Horse Harry Lee, and all these guys came from the South. So they assumed we have the military knowledge to handle this easily, but they didn't have the economic wherewithal. It was mostly an agrarian society. So Lincoln was wise enough to say, let's shut off all the ports and keep their cotton from going out and all the materials they need to fight from coming in. And people say, this is ridiculous. There's no Navy. We don't have a Navy to do this. We got a handful of little ships. And he built this Navy, and the famous Admiral Farragut running through, Mobile Bay, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. They just shut off one by one all these things. And it really, that's what won pretty much. And they lost all the early battles, the North, but they were able to strangle the South economically and eventually, start turning the tide of the war here.
And what's interesting about that, too, is that was nearly a foreign policy crisis that could have turned the Civil War into a world war, or at least an international conflict.
The South was hoping it would, When they cut off King Cotton to England and to France, they thought they'd come and join their side.
Definitely. And it could be thought of that Lincoln was the most influential foreign policy president we've ever had. Now, most people aren't going to tell you that because they would think no, Lincoln is going to be the most influential domestic policy president. But actually, Lincoln's foreign policy was very influential because of what didn't happen. Because he was able to keep other countries from getting involved in the Civil War. And he did that through diplomacy. And it was really the start of a lot of America's diplomatic efforts around the world really started in the Civil War because of that.
Well, so much started and came out of that, including, finally we came together as one country here and not a collection of individual states. It's still a struggle we have to this day, states' rights versus federal rights here. I just got to ask, you look like you're half my age. Why did you have any interest in Abraham Lincoln? I couldn't get my daughter. She's close to 30. She wouldn't show a ding-dong's worth of interest in Abraham Lincoln. That's long, long ago. What attracted you to this?
Well, a couple things. One is the city of Redlands. I love the city of Redlands. It's a great place. I've always liked it. I grew up in Riverside. I've loved to spend weekends in Redlands, and so that's part of it. Yeah, right. Also, another part of it, too, is I love history. I love history generally. And then also, I just like Lincoln's story. And Lincoln has such a compelling story because he's just like someone who was just a regular man. And he really didn't make that much of himself until he was really in his 30s. Not only did he not have any well-known family ties, but he wasn't even that successful of a young man. And then he was self-taught to become a lawyer. He passed the bar exam without ever going to law school. Yeah, right. And you would never think a 30-year-old who has had a lot of debt issues and unemployment and part-time jobs, you would never think in 20 years he's going to be president. That's what happened to Lincoln. And he was one of America's best presidents, maybe the best president.
Certainly one of the most celebrated, right up there. He's part of a pantheon of, you got Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln. Those seem to be the big three. They're immortalized on the Mount Rushmore along with Teddy Roosevelt. Those are the three that people seem to always gravitate towards, and they all have compelling stories. And they all have They all have stories that aren't easy to understand. George Washington walking away from being president, nobody could imagine that. Thomas Jefferson, who says all men are created equal, but he holds slaves, as did Washington a little bit too. And then Lincoln, who comes from nowhere and presides over our most destructive period and keeps us together as a country here.
And I think that's really what you mentioned about Lincoln, of how he presided over the destructive period and he kept our country together. I think that's really like the final point of like why I was interested in Lincoln even as a young man, because I have watched as our country has become more and more polarized. Even in my lifetime, it's become more increasingly like people don't see eye to eye anymore, and there's nothing really that we agree on. It used to just be on certain issues, and now it's really just become like worlds apart.
People don't realize that in the halls of Congress, I think it was a guy named Charles Sumner was caned. Either was he the guy that caned him, or he was the guy that got caned. There was a representative from South Carolina, and there was a representative from Massachusetts, and it got so heated that the one guy pulled out his cane and nearly beat him to death on the floor of the House of Representatives. I mean, it's hard to imagine. We hear people screaming and yelling, but pulling out canes, pulling out guns, really it was clear this was going to boil over, that there was no way to resolve this without a fight.
And I feel that Lincoln, seeing our country through that and helping our country to have, like how he said in the Gettysburg Address, a new birth of freedom, I feel like that is it's an appropriate message for our time, and it's someone that we really need to like look to as a true American hero.
He figured it out at a moment when it seemed like, what's the line in the Gettysburg Address? Whether this experiment conceived in liberty will long soon survive, or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Whether this nation or any nation conceived in liberty will long endure.
Yeah. And can this experiment survive here? Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's interesting too that Lincoln's hope for America was that America would survive.
Yeah.
And he had a proclamation in 1863 where he called for a national day of prayer and fasting, and he was praying that America would return to its former condition of unity and peace. Mm-hmm. Is that what happened? Not really. What happened was America didn't return to its former condition. America became the superpower of the world in every way that you can think of, militarily, politically, socially, economically. Lincoln had no idea what was ahead for America, and that's just really amazing. Of like, what he would have hoped for would be that we would return to peace. What happened was beyond his dreams, probably.
Oh, unbelievably. He was just trying to hold it together, and he did. And through some very tumultuous times, some very personal tragedies, his son dies, I think, as he's going to be inaugurated. His son fell off a train or got run over by a train or something. I forgot the story, but somehow was killed in a train accident, I believe. And, as he's taking office.
I believe it was actually Franklin Pierce's son. One that...
one of his sons dies. I know that.
Yes, one of Lincoln's sons did die. And it was Willie Lincoln, who died in 1862, but he died of disease.
Okay, so I'm romantic. I'm mixing my myths together here, but he loses a child, and that hasn't happened too often. Rarity. John F. Kennedy lost one just as he was about to become president. But
what actually is interesting, though, is it is interesting that Lincoln's son at that time was 11 years old, and the son of Franklin Pierce, who died some years before, was also 11 years old. So there is an interesting connection between those two stories.
Well, don't get me started. That we could go down a rabbit hole with all these weird. How about the Kennedy and the Lincoln connections that they always make? One is killed in, one is elected in 1860, one is elected in 1960, and they're both assassinated. Right. Lincoln supposedly secretary was named Kennedy, and Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. You go on and on and on, these bizarre comparisons between the two. We have these tragic things happen periodically, and they become part of our American myth. And I think that's what it is. It transcends just whoever he is and becomes part of this grand story of who we are.
Right.
Well, it's amazing that you have picked up this mantle. My hat's off to you. I could talk forever about Lincoln and the Civil War. How do people learn more if they want to go visit this museum? Where do they find? I don't even know where it is. Give us the website or how to find it.
Okay, lincolnshrine.org would be the website. And then if you're looking for the address, so you want to actually like look it up on Google Maps or whatever, it would be 125 West Vine Street in Redlands, California, 92373.
And is it right off the
It's
10 freeway out there somewhere? Must be.
it's basically right off the 10 freeway. Orange Street is the main thoroughfare there. It's the same exit that will take you to downtown Redlands, so it's a great day where you can spend the day at
And
the
is it on the
Lincoln Shrine.
grounds? I'm assuming it's on the grounds of this wealthy oilman's house. It must be an extra building or two that he built on his grounds that still survives somehow.
Right now, it's actually on the grounds of the A.K. Smiley Library, actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it's right in downtown. So you have the library, which you can visit, and the library itself is interesting too because it has like late Victorian architecture, and so that part's really cool as well. But it's right on the grounds of the library, and right across from it is the Redlands Bowl. So if it's summertime, take in a concert in the evening, and then within walking distance, you have downtown with a great selection of restaurants, a great selection of family-owned businesses. They've really done well in surviving the pandemic, and so it's a good at least a day.
There are some interesting museums like this scattered around. The Muckenthaler we've had on from up in Fullerton, another wealthy family that left their house and turned it into kind of an event center and art museum and some other things, events and little tiny concerts they do there. This one there. They're scattered here and there are remnants of our early history that we've forgotten. And so many of these people wanted to leave these places to be enjoyed. And yet so many of us drive right by them, have no idea any of this stuff is still there.
Definitely. And thank you for bringing up the Muckenthaler too. That's a great place in Fullerton. I like that place as well.
Similar kind of vibe. I mean, not dedicated to Lincoln, but a similar kind of feel. A wealthy person who decided to leave their beautiful Victorian mansion for others to enjoy, and so it survives when some of these others got torn down or lost over time here. Well, is there a house there attached to this, or no? This was is the gentleman's house still around? The guy who built all this, or
so his house is actually not in Redlands. It's a 2-story 6,000-foot home built in 1902. It's called the D.L. Reich Robert Watchhorn House, and it's at 404 West Highland Avenue. But it's in another part of Redlands. But that is also something else to see too.
So his house survives too, and he left this behind and endowed it somehow that it can. It must be a struggle though to get people to keep coming to this. I remember years ago. We'll go a little minute or two over here. I remember years ago reading about the William S. Hart Museum. Go look up William S. Hart. In the early days of, I came out here to be in the Hollywood, and Hart was one of the original Hollywood cowboys in the silent movie era. Extremely popular fellow, and long since forgotten, like all the silent movie stars are. And so he left his house behind and gave it to the city, I think, of Los Angeles. And they struggled to keep it open because nobody remembers who William S. Hart was anymore. There's parks and stuff named after him, but the interest in continuing to visit his home and his artifacts has waned as he's waned. But Lincoln has held his own in that ground here. I don't think Lincoln has gone down in interest, probably more so over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting in Redlands too, like the Watchhorn House. You can see it as part of like an architectural tour or whatever, but it's the what's open and what's available to actually like explore is the Lincoln Shrine that he left. So it's
here and there. We've done the Majeska. Go look up the Majeska House, Helena Majeska, or whatever her name was, who was a famous in that same 1800s period. She was a singer, an opera singer, and a performer. Went around the West and toured saloons all over the place. And she was from Poland, and she was the great stage actress of her time with Jenny Lind. For some reason, she settled in Orange County, way out in what they now call Majeska Canyon. Her house still survives. And
I have been meaning to visit that house too. That's definitely
another fascinating one. Again, these just forgotten little homes that somebody left behind, and they're a time capsule of that time when these people were very popular, very successful, very well known, and now most of them have long since faded into history here, but their places survive if you want to see them. Some fascinating. So when I saw this Lincoln Shrine, I said, "Oh my goodness, why would there be a Lincoln Shrine anywhere in California? And then when I started to hear the story of this wealthy oil man and his desire to keep the legacy of Lincoln alive, and you, a young guy, picking up and working on this project as well, I'm just fascinated, and I appreciate you coming in and telling us about it. Give us one more time, how do people get in touch with the Lincoln Memorial and Shrine in Redlands, California?
So it's lincolnshrine.org would be the website. And there it'll have, it has virtual tours there. It has information of hours of operation. It has how to get involved. It has...
they probably they probably need donors, I'm sure, but they probably need volunteers and docents and other people to keep... This won't survive without more generations of people like yourself grabbing a hold of this and keeping it alive.
Definitely. And as we emerge from the pandemic, there'll be more opportunities to get involved as well. And they do have an Instagram now too. It's at Lincoln Shrine, and that's been up for about it's getting close to its second year now. So
do they have other events like the Muckenthal is real good? They have car shows and other sorts of crazy. The Majeska House does different things when they open up. I'm assuming they open this up and try and get other reasons to come out there and entice people to stop by and check it all out.
The best time of year to go, obviously any time of year is great, and there's always the concerts going on too, so check those out as well. But if you want to see something Lincoln related, go on the weekend before Lincoln's birthday in a typical year, unless there's COVID going on. And they have a big event. They have world-class Lincoln impersonators. They have cannons. They have horses. They have people dressed up as Civil War soldiers. That's their big open house. That would be cool. That's the best time of year to go. And it's just a great day. It's a great day to just explore that community and just like learn about all things Lincoln. And if you have children, or if you have maybe relatives or friends from another part of the world, that's a great time to expose them a little bit to American history.
And the least likely place you're going to see the legacy of Lincoln live on through the work of young men like this gentleman, Daniel Coates, and the people who keep that wonderful place alive, the city of Redlands and the library and all the other people that struggle to keep this thing going and keep its flame alive. It really is a beautiful treasure, and I look forward to going out there someday. As I drive to Palm Springs, I'm going to pull off the road one of these days and spend an extra hour or two and stop by and check it out here. I appreciate you.
Definitely. It's great to visit if you're on the way to Big Bear or Palm Springs or anywhere, Phoenix, anywhere eastbound.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
may I mention one other?
Please. Let's wrap up here. What else do you want to mention here?
So Lincoln is very frequently quoted, and if you want to quote him on your social media or in your business or whatever, there is a resource where it's well researched, where we know for sure that these are things that Lincoln said, because there's a lot of quotes of Lincoln now that are floating around on social media that are not necessarily fact checked.
A lot of clever, funny quotes he made. Yeah.
So there is a book that is actually it is sold at Lincoln's official presidential library in Illinois, and it's called Abraham Lincoln Quotes, Quips, and Speeches. Okay. And it's just if you get it in print format, it's a small little book. It's just 6 by 4 inches, basically a booklet, and it has quotes by Lincoln on every topic that you can think of, as well as about Lincoln, like by his wife and by his associates and all that. So if you really want to learn about what Lincoln said and want to share some of his quotes, that's a great way to do it, where it's all fact checked and it really is the true Lincoln.
And is there any way if people want to really dive into Lincoln? You sent me pages of notes on Lincoln. I said, oh my God, we'll only get to a fraction of these here. And I already knew a bunch already about Lincoln myself from my fascination with it. How would they reach you if they wanted to learn more about Lincoln? You're kind of an amateur Lincoln historian here.
So if you want to reach me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Is probably the best
That's how we met,
way to do it. Yeah.
And so it's Daniel Coates, Coats.
Yeah, it's linkedin.com/in/Daniel R. Coates, Coats.
Okay.
And feel free to message me, and I'd love to get in touch.
And you'll talk their ear off, as I'm sure I'd love to talk your ear off sometime about Lincoln. I thought I knew a bunch about him. You know a bunch more. You've made this a passion of yours, and it shows.
But you you know some things that I don't know, and I think I know some things that you don't know. So it's kind of one of
maybe
those
we'll
topics
swap.
too.
There you go. Yeah,
Definitely.
exactly.
Like sometimes if you talk to someone who's interested in a topic like that, it's like you learn from each other, you know.
Exactly. Well, there aren't many of us around, my friend. Most of us, history is like what happened last year. It's not what happened 100 years ago. But, those who, as the famous saying goes, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Let's hope we're not doomed to repeat that period of time here. And if we are, that we have somebody of that caliber to step forth out of nowhere like he did. And
but let's hope that we do repeat the period of time that came after the Civil War, between the time of the Civil War and now, where America became what it became.
Yeah, it was a rough couple of years. Of the Reconstruction wasn't too good. I think the Reconstruction would have been a lot different had Lincoln, because he really was advocating a very people wanted to punish the South, understandably, for the fight and the millions killed, and he was like, no, it's over. We had our fight, and let's bring it back together again. In fact, he was assassinated. I think forever changed that period of time, which still lives with us. There's still I tell you, again, we'll go one more second here. I went to school in Virginia, to law school at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Had learned to talk like a Southerner if I wanted to get waited on. And this was in the 80s. There was still a real resentment against Northerners and Yankees and all that. And a lot of it was, the bitter defeat of the Civil War. And a lot of that you hear in this continuing rhetoric of our way of life and states' rights and all this stuff. I mean, it continues. There's still a divide that we haven't been able to close since that period of time. We've come together, but we haven't erased that divide that's still there, that has reemerged now in other ways. But it's been there.
We still live with the legacy of the Civil War, and it's amazing how gracious Lincoln was and how gracious he would have been had he continued to be.
He really
president.
was. He was not about punishing. He was not about continuing. He wanted to just hold it together. He did everything he could, and it was bloody and it was brutal, and he ended it. But he was not about to exterminate or wipe out the South that so many feared.
And that would be an interesting alternative history too, if you looked at like what would have happened had Lincoln not been assassinated, and if he had lived a long life, maybe into his 80s or even 90s, what would his role have been in America throughout the rest of the 1800s?
You can only imagine, because unfortunately he was taken from us, and we were left with what happened here. Well, we're left with no time to discuss this. Maybe we'll have you come back in February again when. It's Lincoln's. Send me a little reminder, and we'll see if we can get you on something.
I definitely would. I would love to.
And we'll come back and continue the conversation. Thank you so much, Daniel Coates, for all that you do and keeping Lincoln's memory alive at this unique, special place that you wouldn't expect to find in Southern California, the Lincoln Memorial and Shrine out in Redlands. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it, folks. If that doesn't perk your curiosity to go out and check out some of our forgotten landmarks or overlooked treasures, then we invite you to come back, because we're going to give you a lot more each and every week right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OCTalkRadio.net.